Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. It's time then to see what's making the headlines with Jack Elsom, the new political editor of The Sun. Congratulations to you. And Pippa Crerar, political editor of The Guardian, with us from now until just before midnight. Lovely to see you both. So as ever, let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with the FT and, in fact, many of tomorrow's newspapers leading on the Chancellor's U-turn on winter fuel payments. The Financial Times reporting the move will cost the Treasury £1.25 billion. The Metro goes with the headline, humiliating. The Sun said it was foolish, so say sorry, as it focuses on calls for Rachel Reeves to apologise for the U-turn. The Express labels the Chancellor's decision a victory for pensioners, while The Times says millions escape winter fuel cuts. Labour MPs are warning the Chancellor not to make the same mistake on disability benefits, so says the Eye. Winter Wonderland reads the Mirror's headline. Elsewhere, the government will pump billions of pounds into a nuclear power renaissance to keep Britain's lights on. That is according to The Telegraph. The Guardian reports that the £14 billion investment at Sizewell C on the Suffolk coast will create 10,000 jobs and power the equivalent of 6 million homes. And The Star says folklore is now the go-to for many people looking for meaning in their lives, with wizards, goblins and monsters replacing religion. So let's get more with Jack and Pippa. Let's go to your paper first of all, and your byline as a new political editor, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It was foolish, so say sorry, long-awaited, much called for, and in a sense, much delayed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what we saw today, I think, was the culmination of one of the biggest U-turns in modern political history anyway, and probably one of the most chaotic, because a lot has happened in the 11 or so months since Labour got into power last July. But one constant has been the toxicity which this winter fuel cut has evoked in members of the public. And that sort of burst to the fore, I think, in those local elections in May, when it came up on the doorstep time and time again. Even before Keir Starmer said that there was going to be some movement on this in PMQs a few weeks ago, it looked like it had been heading for the shredder. But since he said that, it has really been quite a slow-motion U-turn, because details of this have sort of been drip-fed out. Originally, it was going to be having to wait till the budget for the details in the autumn. Now, just before the spending review on Wednesday, we have the final details about how many people are actually going to get this winter fuel payment in the winter. It's two-thirds of people, 9 million. But we're picking up today, as on the Sun's front page, one, I think Rachel Reeves was so defiant today and saying that she was right to make the original call back in July to cut winter fuel, to means test it, refused calls to apologise, and then also, how is she going to pay for this? The Treasury is saying it's going to cost £1.25 billion to give three-quarters of people the winter fuel payment this winter. She says it won't be from borrowing, so that means either it's going to be more spending cuts or potentially even tax rises.
Yes, and they leave themselves open to us waiting another long time, and with a great deal of speculation about how that occurs. And the question was always, how would they organise it? £35,000, if we look at the Financial Times, is the kick-out figure, if I can put it like that. With some peculiarities, like, it's not a household figure, is it? It's an individual figure, so you could be, put two together at 34,000, you could still get it. So what are the details then, Pippa?
Yes, so if they receive £35,000 in income or below, then pensioners will be able to qualify for the full restoration of the winter fuel payment, which is between £200 to £300 if they're over 80. And that is, as Jack says, up from post-cut 1.5 million people, back up now to 9 million people. So it's going to affect an awful lot of people now. And I was listening to the statement in the House of Commons chamber earlier, and there was several MPs standing up and saying, look, this is not quite as clear as we would like it to be, because you could end up in a situation where you have somebody in a household, one partner in a pensioner couple, earning less than 35,000 and therefore qualifying for the winter fuel payment, and their partner being a millionaire. And yet they'd still get it. And the money will be clawed back from individuals, so that individual will have to pay back half of the winter fuel payment, but they'll still qualify for half, which is just, not really what the money was intended for. And I was very struck by a comment by Paul Johnson, who is the outgoing chair of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who said that this wouldn't have been in his top 100 of measures to take. I mean, of course, he has the benefit of not having to stand for election. And as Jack rightly says, this was incredibly politically toxic for the government on the doorstep. But he suggested that this is not a measure that actually would tackle poverty. And this is another thing which was bubbling up in the House of Commons chamber earlier with some Labour MPs in particular, that why is the focus, when we're told that there's no money to spend on things like on benefits and so on, why is the focus on pensioners, many of whom are quite comfortable and who will be receiving this payment, rather than, for example, children or working families, which the government says working families is their priority. And as we already know, tens of thousands of children have been pushed into poverty because of their them maintaining the two-child cap on universal credit. So I think there's a bit of discomfort in the Labour ranks tonight that while it's right that pensioner poverty was addressed, while they understand that this was a politically very difficult issue for the government and they probably had to U-turn on it from that point of view, they're uncomfortable about the fact that so far wealthy pensioners rather than children are the ones being focused on.
And Nigel Farage saying you wouldn't have got here without reform. We're thinking, oh, were they strong in the Commons about this? But no, it was those local elections, weren't they, which was the doorstep problem for people. This is an entirely political decision, whatever Rachel Reeves says about a brighter, economic picture for the UK, which is why she can do it. So the Financial Times then, Reeves retreat, restores winter fuel payments to pensioners. Many papers, though, are now talking about what happens to the planned disability cards. So the Eye, for example, winter fuel U-turn gets a warm welcome, but Labour MPs warn Reeves don't make the same mistake on disability benefits. Now, we've got the spending review coming up on Wednesday. Are we starting to listen out for, the implications for the cuts to disability benefits?
Yeah, and I think there's now a sort of growing sense in the country that Labour are at the mercy of voters, obviously, but also some of their MPs. And it does now a sense that they're almost getting sort of buffeted around. They're not really in control. Obviously, we've had the big U-turn on winter fuel. Next, potentially, we can see, and we're hearing rumblings about potential softening on that disability benefit cut announced a few months ago to make about £5 billion in total to the welfare package. Now, a lot of people are saying that this welfare cut doesn't go far enough. £5 billion in the grand scheme of things is not a lot when you're looking at a sickness benefits bill of about £100 billion. But what has really got some Labour MPs irked is these cuts to the PIP payments, personal independence payments, which are going to target some people who have disabilities, and they have made their feelings incredibly strongly known to the Chancellor. Now, it's not just a few backbench MPs, sort of the awkward squad, traditional ones in the Labour ranks who are making this point. Lots of sort of Starmerites who are elected in 2024 have been very angry and vocal about this, and if they get the sense that Rachel Reeves is in the position to move, she obviously has moved now on winter fuel, next in their sights is going to be getting her to soften her disability benefits.
Is always the danger of U-turning, because then the pressure's on again, or even more strongly, isn't it? So when does this come to a fore, the round disability benefits?
So I think it's probably putting it slightly strongly to suggest that Labour is at the whim of their backbenchers, despite the fact that they have U-turned on this particular issue. However, what it has done is emboldened some of those backbenchers, not just to call for things like the two-child benefit cap to be scrapped, as we've just discussed, but also when it comes to the welfare cuts that Jack mentioned. We are expecting, as things stand, a vote on first vote this month on the welfare plans. There are suggestions that as many as 170 Labour backbenchers could rebel. And I think the feeling is that the government's decision to U-turn on winter fuel and to give very strong hints from Keir Starmer downwards that they want, if they can afford it, to scrap the two-child benefit cap later in the year potentially or at some future point, are designed in part to reassure Labour backbenchers that they do care about poverty and they do care about making sure that the most vulnerable in society are protected. And that message isn't yet getting through when it comes to the PIP cuts in particular. And so whether we end up seeing a bit of tweaking in how PIP is awarded the assessments to people, because that number is increasing over time, and the bill is reaching something like £90 billion now, which is not sustainable, the government believes. The problem that they have is that they have set out their plans for this side of the summer recess. Originally, they had wanted to go even further with benefit cuts, later in the year, potentially around the time of the budget. They haven't yet even been able to be in a position of getting stage 1 over the line. They're very worried about what that implication that has for stage 2, which they want to get to, because that's the bit where they're going to make the big argument for reform and fairness and try and bring Labour MPs with them. But they need to get there first.
And Rachel Reeves pictured on the front page of the Metro with their rather fine headline, humiliating. Does this leave her damaged? Or was the damage done at the point when she scrapped winter fuel payments, 11 months ago or so?
Yeah, I mean, trust lost is very, very hard to get back in politics. And Rachel Reeves, I think, did lose a lot of her political credibility last July. I think she showed that there was lacking of political antennae, potentially being bounced around by civil servants who many former chancellors have told you have had winter fuel in their sights for a long, long time. Political questions about her future continue to abound. I don't think that actually, while Keir Starmer, we know, is pretty ruthless in terms of dispatching some of his closest friends if it is politically expedient, I don't think we can see Rachel Reeves going anytime soon. I mean, they are completely ideologically joined at the hip. That budget was as much Keir Starmer's as it was Rachel Reeves. And, just ask Liz Truss about the perils of sacking one of your chancellors, because often the Prime Minister isn't far behind.
Lots more to discuss in the next part of our programme. Stay there, both of you. We will be talking about this on the front of The Guardian. Labour pledges £14 billion for nuclear to get the UK off the fossil fuel rollercoaster, as the paper puts it. Back with plenty more after this break.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest 'Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe. Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls. and big-picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again by Jack Elsom, the political editor of The Sun, and Pippa Crerar, political editor of The Guardian. Pippa, should we go to The Guardian? In fact, it's also the lead for The Telegraph, with Ed Miliband writing, it says, in The Telegraph. But this is part of the spending review and a big launch revealing that we're about to hit the new age of, you know, a new golden age of nuclear power.
Yeah, so we already knew that Rachel Reeves had a spending envelope of £113 billion for capital investment in infrastructure projects. And, you know, last week we saw her out and about talking about transport across the rest of England outside the southeast. We're expecting affordable housing to get a chunk of that. And there will be other areas, including schools and hospitals, that receive capital funding as well, doing what the government believes is kind of like fixing the foundations after years of cuts, which were focused so often under previous governments on capital expenditure. So it's a huge amount of money. Ed Miliband wanted a big chunk of it. And while we don't yet know what's going to happen with insulation, which was one of the big net zero commitments, which I think the fear is that that's going to be scaled back, despite the impact it would have on emissions. What he has got, by the looks of things, is 14 billion quid extra for Sizewell C nuclear power station on the Suffolk coast, which had long been expected, which the previous government had put in £3.6 billion towards, but will enable finally, after 15 years of speculation, finally for this programme to get off the ground, lots of jobs to be created and so on. So it's both good in terms of sustainability, although of course there are people that aren't very keen on nuclear as a source of energy. But as Ed Miliband argues in The Telegraph, and actually, quite interestingly, The Telegraph is quite supportive of this, despite being against, sort of generally editorially against wind farms and other forms of, and solar farms and so on, and other ways of renewable energy. So they're welcoming this. It's not just the big Sizewell C announcement. There's also we're going to get the results of a competition that the government has been holding, a long-running competition to build one of Europe's first modular nuclear reactor programmes. So these are these small nuclear programmes, and they hope that that would start to attract private investment, all again behind their sort of their bid for growth. And I think Rolls-Royce is the favourite to be chosen.
So why are we quibbling about the 1.25 billion it's going to cost for the winter fuel payments and these massive sums? And it's because one is capital expenditure, obviously, isn't it? And you've got different rules on borrowing, therefore. So, you know, it feels a really peculiar system to lay yourself such strict rules on borrowing when you get yourself in political nightmare over one thing, and yet you're splashing the cash on the other. I mean, for the public, it's not understandable, is it?
No, and it's all the difference between day-to-day spending and sort of capital investment. And, you know, viewers might remember last year when Rachel Reeves did some jiggery-pokery with these ironclad fiscal rules to essentially free up about £113 billion so she could borrow money to invest. And so at the spending review on Wednesday, we're going to see a lot of these sort of big, shiny infrastructure projects like investing in Sizewell C, which actually won't go on the books when it comes to day-to-day spending, which is going to get, we believe, a real terms reduction 1.2%. So departmental budgets are going to be squeezed day-to-day. That's where a lot of the haggling's been going on behind the scenes with Rachel Reeves and various cabinet ministers. Yvette Cooper finally settled today, we understand. So the spending review is now done and the envelope for the end of this Parliament is now settled. But the main item I think we're going to see, which is big, shiny capital projects, but I think the detail is going to be really in these sort of day-to-day departmental budgets and which departments are going to face the squeeze. We know defence and health are going to be the big winners, but who's going to be the losers?
I know you want to say one sentence.
Very quickly, the government politically wants to make the point that they are spending £300 billion more than the Conservatives would, with capital and day-to-day. And their point is that that means that they are different from what went before.
OK. 2 stories, 1 minute. Not possible, really. But anyway, very quickly, Greta Thunberg pictured there in Ashdod currently, we're told, on the Israeli coast, apprehended. Just quickly.
I mean, Greta Thunberg sailing, I think, on her yacht towards Gaza. I think a lot of people are thinking this is a bit of a publicity stunt. That's what the Israelis have said as well. A symbolic amount of aid, I think, she had with her, and she's been obviously seized now by the Israeli authorities. And I think people thought that actually she's, while trying to make a stand, sort of looks a bit silly in all this.
Baby formula, they said, was on that boat. And very quickly, the California governor threatening to sue Trump, Trump supporting his arrest.
Very striking photos on the front of The Guardian and of The Times of those protesters.
Should we see the front page?
The protesters against the immigration raids, which started off mostly peaceful.
Yeah.
And then Donald Trump, for the first time, I think, since the LA riots, the LA race riots, brought in the National Guard, and now apparently is asked Marines to go to California, although they're not yet able to take action because he hasn't pressed the button on the specific bit of legislation that would require them to do so.
Yeah, OK. Pippa, Jack, lovely to see you both. Thank you. See you for more at 11, obviously. Here's the weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So unsettled into the weekend, increasing temperatures bring a risk of thunderstorms, but it should turn drier next week. So a mild, mainly dry start tomorrow. Southern parts breezy, grey and damp. North fine, bar a few coastal showers. Central England and North Wales will slowly brighten through the morning. Southern parts staying rather grey, little rain or drizzle in places. The north looks mainly dry and sunny. Expect further showers near northern coast, warmer everywhere than today.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
It is 11 o'clock. This is Sky News' extended press preview. Our top story. The Chancellor accused of a humiliating climb down as she reveals details of the government's U-turn on winter fuel payments. Also tonight, Donald Trump hits back at California's governor, who says he is suing the president for deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles.
Ditch the phone! Ditch the phone!
Greta Thunberg is among activists detained by Israel after attempting to reach Gaza on an aid boat. Well, over the next hour, we will be discussing today's news with art reviewers Jack Elsom and Pippa Crerar. And later we'll have a full run-through for you of tomorrow's front pages. Hello there, good evening. It was one of the first acts of the Labour government designed to help balance what it said was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. But limiting the winter fuel payment to only those who claim pension credit has been a real thorn in the side for Labour. And today, the Chancellor announced the details of a major U-turn, with more pensioners set to receive the benefit this year. So the Chancellor says 9 million people will now be eligible. The payment, worth up to £300, will be given to pensioners with an income below £35,000 a year. The Treasury projects that the new arrangement will cost £1.25 billion, but it's not yet clear how it will be funded. Well, over the next hour, we will bring you tonight's headlines, tomorrow's front pages and the views of our paper reviewers, the political editor of The Sun, Jack Elsom, and the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar. First, though, our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has more.
Just less than a year ago, the Chancellor walked into the biggest, most difficult decision of her career, cutting winter fuel payments for most pensioners. On the day, she told me why it had to be done.
It's not an easy decision to announce that winter fuel payment would only go to people receiving pensioner credit, but it is the right decision in the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Fast forward to May, and it was that decision blamed for a dreadful night in the local elections. A month later, and now she says she's listened and will reinstate payments for 9 million out of the 10 million pensioners.
From this winter, 9 million pensioners will now receive winter fuel payments. It will be still means tested, but at a higher level.
Interview after interview, a succession of difficult questions.
I was always clear that the number one priority of this government was to return stability to the economy. We did that with a number of difficult decisions, but because of those decisions, our public finances are now in a better position.
Isn't it verging on fake news to claim that the economy is substantially better? The OBR halved growth in March. The OECD downgraded Britain just a week ago. It's just not true that we're in a better position.
Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility increased the growth forecast for every other year.
There's a pattern post-local elections. The Labour left shouts and you crumble. Winter fuel gone without you telling us how you're going to pay for it. Two-child benefit cap being junked. Disability cuts softened. You're cosplaying fiscal discipline. Isn't this the worst nightmare of the markets? They are learning that you can't say no to your MPs.
I set out the spending envelope in the budget and the spring statement and we'll be setting out the spending settlements for every government department based on that envelope that we set in the budget and in the spring statement. And markets and the public will be able to see public services living within their means, living within the totals that we set out this week.
Opponents call it an embarrassment.
The most humiliating climb down a government has ever faced in its first year in office.
This is a Chancellor who has been spooked by her own side, blowing a black hole of up to £1 billion in the budget that she's going to have to fill, probably with tax rises in the autumn, not the run-up to a spending review that any Chancellor would have wanted. Is Rachel Reeves a good Chancellor, Paul?
Rachel Reeves has, to be fair to her, inherited a really difficult situation. I think the error, if she's made an error, is she left herself so little space for manoeuvre in the budget back in October.
Will she now be forgiven by pensioners and forgiven by ex-Labour voters? Could this week be the one that leaves more people smiling on the Chancellor? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, plenty of coverage on this, as you might expect, in tomorrow's newspapers. There is the Mirror. It says the U-turn will bring joy to old age pensioners, celebrating the decision as winter wonderful. In The Sun, a different view, the paper carries a double-page spread titled Winter Blunderstand and says taxes could rise to foot the bill. The Daily Mail brands the government deluded and calls the U-turn a humiliation for Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer. Well, let's bring in our guest then. Let's get the thoughts of Jack Elsom, the political editor of The Sun, and Pippa Crerar, political editor of The Guardian. And it was the front page of The Sun I was hoping to see, actually. Your front page with your new byline on as well. It was fuelish, so say sorry. And also the Daily Mail deluded. Starmer is ridiculed for suggesting the move's now possible because Labour's fixed our stricken economy. So what's, explain your front page to us if you can.
Yeah, and listen, I don't think people in Downing Street tonight will be entirely surprised at getting a slew of negative front pages of many of the newspapers. It has been largely incredibly damaging, this whole episode, for Labour, not just the initial taking away of winter fuel payments, but then the shambolic way in which it was tried to be corrected. And I think that if you're going to do a U-turn, you've got to do it cleanly and rip off the plaster in one go. But since we had a drip of stories, including Pippa's story in The Guardian a few months ago, suggesting there were talks happening here, what we've had is then a sort of a drip of information, which has created a load of uncertainty for these pensioners who actually are at the heart of this, and they're the ones who are worrying whether they're going to get their winter fuel payments or not. We saw Keir Starmer come up in PMQs, say he was going to U-turn. We then had a whole bunch of mixed messages. Even yesterday, they sent poor Peter Kyle out onto the rounds, and he seemed to suggest that we weren't going to get any details until the budget. And then today, we're still left, it doesn't seem to have learned their lesson at all with this, we're still left with an open-ended question about how this thing is going to be paid for. And it just, I think, feeds into the whole sense that the Labour operation at the moment is not entirely in control, not entirely gripping the situation, and it leaves them open to attack by their political rivals.
Well, there's the inside pages of the Sun, isn't it? So fuel payments, U-turn shambles, taxpayers face hikes to foot the bill. Winter blunderland is how you've put it. To be fair, the front of the Daily Express says it's a victory for pensioners, which in a sense it is. But have they fixed it fairly, do you think? And or will there be lingering criticisms of this idea that, unpicking means testing? It's a very complicated business, isn't it, when it's not universal?
It is, and they've gone for the George Osborne child benefit approach, which is basically reinstate it for everybody and then claw it back from the wealthiest pensioners, or in this case, those who earn more than the average income. So if you earn £35,000 or less, then you're entitled to keep the payment of between £200 and £300. If you earn more, then even if it's one of you within a couple, then that half of the payment has to be paid back through the tax system. This has obviously been the most politically unpopular decision that this government has made in its first year, and it has dragged on and on and on from last July when Rachel Reeves made it, creating all sorts of uncertainty, as Jack rightly says, for pensioners. And I think Reeves coming out today and suggesting that as Starmer did a couple of weeks ago, suggesting that the economic circumstances had changed significantly enough in order to be able to U-turn on this policy, which has now got a £1.25 billion price tag, kind of was going to raise a bit of an eyebrow with a very jaded, cynical public who've heard politicians make promises on pensions and other things for a very long time, and find that they don't stand up to scrutiny. And I think most notably, of course, of Boris Johnson's decision in 2022 to suspend the pensions triple lock, so that pensioners didn't get pensions rising in line with inflation, 2.5% or wages, because wages were soaring at 8%. And he said it was going to be a one-off and suspended it, but he broke a manifesto pledge. So this isn't just a Labour induced problem. This is something that the government has inherited, along with the economic backdrop, which is that there's been a real lack of trust, lack of faith in what politicians say. And it's why, up until this point, Labour have been pretty careful about insisting that any promises they made had to be properly funded, and why this still not being resolved creates a problem, because we've got to wait till the autumn to find out exactly how it will be paid for, opening them up to criticism that is an uncosted promise, which is exactly what they they said they wouldn't do and what they have tried so far not to do. So it remains problematic. It's not all resolved today.
Yes, they did say we are listening. Humiliating is how the Metro put it, obviously. Does it damage Rachel Reeves, and where does the fight go next? Because certainly in other newspapers, such as The Eye, it's all now about disability benefits and whether those who are against some of the policies are emboldened in order to, you know, keep going at the government in order to scale back some of the welfare cuts.
Yeah, I think in terms of Rachel Reeves, I think Pippa was right. And to their credit, before the election, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves did a very good job in terms of restoring fiscal credibility to the Labour Party. I think that was their #1 mission, something that was totally shot to pieces under Jeremy Corbyn.
She did it by having breakfast meetings with business leaders, not putting national insurance on business.
The smoked salmon offensive and all of the rest of it. And then I think in very quick succession, very quickly, they unravelled a lot of that with the winter fuel, with giving big pay rises to train drivers, with the £25 billion of national insurance hikes. In terms of where they go now, obviously some Labour MPs have their sights on the disability benefit cuts, but I think the real battle lines that are going to come is going to be on the two-child benefit cap. And it seems that Nigel Farage has spied an opening here to really sort of punch Labour's bruise on this, saying that he is going to do it. The question is whether it's popular in the country. It's clearly popular on Labour backbenchers. Most of them sort of cut their political teeth in the sort of Cameron eras on austerity, and they came into politics and got into politics to fight all of that. In the country, I think it's a different issue. And if you look at some polling, it actually shows that the two-child benefit cap is quite popular with large swathes of the public. And I think that Keir Starmer, he might get the short-term political hit of placating Labour backbenchers, but in the public, you know, the idea that you don't want to pay for someone else's children actually can be quite popular.
Yet at the same time, that particular policy, all the child poverty experts say that there's no panacea to child poverty, right? And as the government has acknowledged, you have to do lots of things in different areas, from housing to education and beyond. But if there was one single policy which could make the most significant difference to the numbers of children in child poverty, it would be scrapping the two-child benefit cap. And if that decision needs to be made, an argument needs to be made for it at the same time. And what this government hasn't been brilliant at yet is communicating its arguments necessarily. So it might not be popular with everybody, but if their mission is driving down child poverty, which for the Labour Party it is, then they will have to do it, and they'll have to be able to pay for it, and they'll have to argue why it's important.
Well, I know you will be looking very carefully at the spending review on Wednesday, and hints to that, for example. News on the spending review is starting to drip into the papers. We'll no doubt come on to it a bit later on. But in the meantime, let's head to the States, shall we? Donald Trump claiming tonight that Los Angeles would have been completely obliterated if he had not sent in America's reserve force to deal with protests over immigration raids. But the US president is now being sued by California's governor, who says the decision to deploy the US National Guard was an outrageous overreach. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has this report now from Los Angeles.
This is a city scarred by days of protest. In the heart of LA's downtown, inflamed tension and acts of violence. City Hall, the seat of local government, is just a few streets away. The Mexican flag has become a symbol of protest against deportations. Anger directed at ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, after a series of raids.
This is where Donald Trump's immigration policies have ended up almost 5 months into his presidency. Pandemonium and lawlessness on the streets of one of America's biggest cities.
Protests were initially sparked by raids on workplaces across LA, a search to round up illegal immigrants. But here you see the arrest of David Huerta, a local Labour union leader who ICE say was interfering with their work.
We're here to say free David Huerta!
A peaceful demonstration today calling for his release. But the previous night, a different story, as violence and vandalism broke out across LA. This seemed to change the tide, the deployment of the National Guard at the behest of the president.
Projectiles are being thrown at the police officers, and in turn, they're deploying these rubber bullets and tear gas. California Governor Gavin Newsom says that this chaos is exactly what President Trump wants.
Newsom argued the president breached state sovereignty by ordering troops here against his wishes. Trump described LA as an invaded and occupied city.
He's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening.
Politicians on both sides of the aisle condemned the disorder. This woman was one of a number arrested. Why are you here today?
Because a lot of my people are getting taken away. We've lived here all our lives, and it's like, how are you going to send us back to a place where we don't even know? You told us to come here for opportunity. We came, and it's like, I don't know, what do we do from here?
They shot me in the leg with a rubber bullet. They hit me in the head. If you can see under my hair, there's bruising.
This is the most significant pushback yet against Donald Trump's immigration policy. One of the key arteries of this city, the main road in downtown Los Angeles, completely closed as police encircle protesters.
The president said that any violence which impeded officials would be treated as a form of rebellion. The White House crackdown on immigration has definitely been divisive. The fight back here clearly bringing some together. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
So how are the newspapers covering it then? There's the Metro focusing on California Governor Gavin Newsom's words, who's called Donald Trump reckless. Trump's response is inside the Eye, the US president claiming deploying the National Guard saved LA. And inside the Mirror, a double-page spread with the headline, LA Rages. So protests continuing tonight. Let's just show you the latest pictures, shall we, that we've got from a couple of cameras. This comes as it was confirmed by the Pentagon. Not so many people out tonight, and certainly not as inflamed as it was last night, for example. The US military confirming that it has activated 700 Marines to help back up the National Guard that we can see there. And the Marines would help protect federal personnel and federal property in the greater Los Angeles area. But really, the story now has moved to the war of words between state and federal forces. Gavin Newsom absolutely furious, Pippa, that Donald Trump overrode him to send in the National Guard.
Yes, I mean, it's not quite unprecedented, but the last time this happened was in the 1980s when the National Guard was sent into California to help quell the race riots that happened after murder by white police officers of a black resident. Yeah. These protests, however, over the ICE immigration raids, the Trump immigration raids, started off largely peaceful and numbered hundreds on Friday or Saturday, and then very quickly escalated in response to Donald Trump sending in, I think, up to 2,000...
There's some bad language on some of these pictures, so we have to just be a little bit careful of what you show you, but anyway, just
reflecting strong feeling,
yes.
I'm sure,
so, yeah.
that Donald Trump's decision to deploy 2,000 National Guard members in Los Angeles in response to those protests, and then taking the extraordinary step, or as borders are, Tom Homan, taking the extraordinary step of threatening to arrest Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, which Newsom suggested, combined with the decision to deploy troops on the ground in LA, represented a step towards authoritarianism, a fear which, of course, many Democrats have. Gavin Newsom is one of the most Democrat of Democratic governors. Trump is obviously at the extreme of the Republican Party, and this is spilled over into the political sphere as an almighty clash between the two establishment parties, taking sides. I mean, various senators and leading congressmen were asked about Trump's actions and language on the Hill today. The majority of them suggested that they hadn't quite seen what he'd said yet and tried to keep a low profile. But this is yet another example, I think, of Donald Trump trying to to create a sort of a political row, more than a political row, ultimately for his own ends. He suggested that Gavin Newsom is utterly hopeless at his job. Some Republicans in California might share that, but certainly these protests were peaceful primarily initially, and it is this direct intervention from the US president which has sparked them to create the sort of images that we're seeing in the papers tomorrow morning.
Yes, indeed so. Well, in the meantime, Donald Trump did give a news conference a little bit earlier, about the situation in Los Angeles, but he was also asked about his relationship again with Elon Musk. Let's have a listen.
There was this New York Times report that he did not want to talk about, Elon Musk, that alleged that he, towards the end of his time in the White House, was blurring the lines between recreational use of drugs and medicinal. Do you think he ever had drugs here at the White House?
I really don't know. I don't think so. I hope not. Look, I wish him well. You understand. We had a good relationship, and I just wish him well. Very well, actually.
Well, in the meantime, Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, is in Moscow, and our correspondent there, Ivor Bennett, caught up with him.
They've had 5 months of intense day and night, hardly any sleep. And anybody who went through that would know that, your nerves are pretty much shredded after that time. And then once they cleared all the opposition, and it was just the two of them really left, it was a case of how do you get out of this mode of, getting rid of the opposition. And they got to a point where just the two of them left, so they have to start fighting with each other. But I won't say that's exactly what happened. It was just a sort of interpretation. But I would say that nerves were, stretched and so forth. We've all been there. Everyone's been there who's over 20 years old.
And have you spoken to him since? How's he doing?
No, I've sent him several messages, and he's replied to me, don't worry, we're sorting it out.
It continues to be extraordinary, doesn't it? And certainly Errol Musk, Elon's father, was talking to Russian media earlier this week saying, he's got PTSD from his time at the White House. Half the questions today to Donald Trump was about his relationship with Elon Musk. Have you got plans to call him? What can you tell us about his row with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, which was reported in US newspapers? I mean, it still continues. Everyone predicted the fall would come, but it has been fascinating to see.
Yeah, but it does seem there's now been a bit of a détente, and both sides clearly recognise that having this war of words with each other will lead to mutually assured destruction. And we saw, Musk have a go at Trump about the Epstein files, and then Trump threatened to get rid of subsidies for his space programme. Musk threatened to cancel the whole thing altogether, and so it clearly was turning into something very, very ugly. Then we had these newspaper briefings over the weekend about Musk's drug habit, and apparently even alleged drug habit, I should say, and even reports that Trump had personally been calling Elon Musk, telling him off about his alleged ketamine habit as well. So very, very hostile briefings with each other, although in that press conference, Trump did seem uncharacteristically measured in his response to Elon Musk. We know he likes to have a big row. We just talked about that with Gavin Newsom, but it does seem now that he has mellowed a bit and the two are sort of stepping back from the brink.
Yes, will you get rid of Starlink? No, it's a good system. Reports he was going to get rid of his Tesla car that he bought in such flamboyant style in order to help Elon Musk and his business. No, I'm just going to move it around a bit. Where are you going to move it? I've got lots of property, it could go anywhere. I mean, it was a fascinating, as you say, a calming of the situation, certainly. But, your reflections, Pippa.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the things that's most interesting about this is that while we expected this moment to come at some point, maybe not quite so soon, it was inevitable with two such huge egos, two such powerful men, the most powerful man in the world and the wealthiest man in the world, there was going to at some point be an almighty clash, and that then the fallout would ensue. That has now happened. But what I think is really interesting is about the impact it may or may not have on how American people feel about Donald Trump. I've spoken to senior Democrats about what the breaking point they regard would be between Donald Trump and the American people who elected him into power, despite knowing everything about him, all the allegations around sexual impropriety, about racism, about corruption, about undermining democracy, and they still voted him in. So what would it be that could push them to a breaking point? And one view within the Democratic Party is that the fact he surrounded himself by billionaires like Elon Musk, but also actually the majority of the rest of his cabinet are very powerful individuals whose lives are so far removed from the majority of everyday Americans. And I think Trump's wealth alone is worth the equivalent of 52% of the poorest Americans. His wealth is equivalent of that. And if their lives don't improve economically, if Trump fails to deliver the economic improvements that he's promised, and at the same time is surrounded by a bunch of billionaires who are doing very nicely, thank you very much, out of cryptocurrency and any other industries that they seem to be, electric cars, whatever they're sort of getting stuck into, then that could be the moment that relationship between the American people and Donald Trump finally frays.
Yes, back to prices of goods and inflation, isn't it, which is partly what he won the election on. Fascinating stuff. Plenty more from both of you in just a moment. Coming up next, we will have the latest on Greta Thunberg's unhappy landing in Israel. More on that picture, the latest pictures, in fact, and as you can see, the front of the Telegraph. Back in a minute.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Well, you're watching the press preview. I'm joined once again by Jack Elsom, political editor of The Sun, and Pippa Crerar, political editor of The Guardian. Have more from both of you in a moment, but let's just show you the latest pictures we've got. And this was after Israel said a yacht carrying Greta Thunberg and other activists had docked now in Ashdod port after the group was forced by the Israeli Navy to divert from their mission, which was to deliver aid to Gaza. Well, the campaigners had been trying to raise awareness about restrictions on aid convoys when they were intercepted by the Israeli military, which says they'll now be shown footage of the 7th of October attacks carried out by Hamas. So let's just show you one of the newspapers concerning that. The front of the Telegraph then has an image of the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg arriving in Israel. So let's go to Jack and Pippa. The latest from the Israelis seems to be that if you agree to deportation, you can fly from Tel Aviv, otherwise you're going to be in a detention centre. But anyway, you know, they call it, what, a selfie aid mission, the Israelis say. The activists trying to say, why don't you get aid into Gaza? Why don't you open the port of Gaza, which we know is heavily damaged? And by the way, we were carrying baby formula, so
yeah, and listen, obviously the Israelis having no truck with this whatsoever, have seized the boat, are going to force them to watch the Hamas October 7th massacre before deporting them back to their home countries. I think whatever you think about the situation in Israel at the moment, and clearly more aid needs to get into the Gaza Strip, being heavily destroyed, and many Gazans are terribly suffering. I'm not sure that most of the public will think that Greta Thunberg, a climate campaigner, sailing on a yacht towards an active war zone is probably the best idea. And I think that a lot of people are probably saying what it is, which is a bit of an attention-seeking drive.
Pippa?
Well, I actually think a lot of people understand why she feels, and the other activists feel so desperate about the situation on the ground. Israel hasn't... the situation there is terrible. People are starving. Israel has prevented UN-run humanitarian bodies from distributing food and is instead relying on a rather secretive group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is currently run by an evangelical Christian and has no track record of delivering aid in war zones at all. It says that it has delivered about 11 million meals, which even if distributed equitably across the Gazan population would still only amount to one meal every 2 days for every Gazan, and they probably wouldn't be shared equitably around. And those shortages and that desperate hunger combined have driven to even more difficult circumstances where you've had Palestinians repeatedly killed by Israeli forces trying to reach these food distribution points. I mean, whatever Greta Thunberg's critics say about her motivations, she is attempting to highlight the terrible situation on the ground and the intense frustration that many people feel, including Israelis who have been out on the streets of Tel Aviv and marching around the Gazan border in protest at the treatment of Gazans. This is in no way suggesting that the actions of Hamas on October the 7th were in any way justifiable. There was a terrorist atrocity, and I think there's a huge amount of sympathy and support for people that were caught up in that. However, the response at this point, 2 years on, is so imbalanced that the people of Gaza are being wiped out, quite literally displaced and wiped out. And it's no surprise that young activists are trying to raise attention to what has really become one of the shames of not just the Middle East, but the global, the political, geopolitical backdrop that we're all looking at and you know, really just think is desperate.
Well, certainly the latest we heard from the Israelis is that the 12 activists were undergoing medical checks to ensure they are in good health. And as I said, detention centre, deportation, see what comes of it after that. But there's the picture of Greta Thunberg, Swedish climate campaigner, still only 22 years old, as I think you read there, didn't you, Jack? Lots more still to come in our press preview, including, after the break, a full run-through of tomorrow's front pages. We'll discuss more of the day's news as well.